Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The late afternoon sunlight spilled across the living room, warm and golden as it kissed the edges of the yoga mat. I bent forward, stretching, feeling the soft pull in my muscles when I sensed him behind me, silent, close. His presence was always magnetic, but today, it felt charged, electric. My breath caught as his fingers brushed the side of my waist, light, deliberate, sending a rush of heat to my skin. I straightened slightly, heart thudding in my chest, and turned just enough to meet his gaze. Those eyes, dark, intent, held me there. Neither of us spoke. The room seemed to shrink, leaving only the quiet sound of our breathing and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. "Focused," he murmured, voice low, teasing. I tried to smile, to shrug it off, but the way he leaned in, the way his hand lingered just a moment too long, made my pulse skip. His scent, faint cologne mixed with the warmth of his skin, wrapped around me, pulling me into the gravity of that moment. My palms pressed harder into the mat as I resumed the pose, but my mind was elsewhere, every sense alive to the nearness of him. Then, without warning, his grip firmed, fingers sliding around my waist, guiding me slightly closer. A playful challenge flickered in his eyes as his breath grazed my ear, making me shiver. "Hold still," he whispered, almost like a dare. And then, everything paused. His touch, the tension, the air between us, suspended, waiting. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because whatever was about to happen next, I knew it would change the rhythm of that quiet afternoon entirely. The mat no longer felt like a space for balance, it had become a battlefield of breath and unspoken intent. The warmth of his hand lingered on my waist long after he stepped back, leaving a quiet ache that felt both familiar and unsettling. We had been married for years, and yet, moments like that, when his presence felt overpowering and new, were rare now. Somewhere between the endless routines, late-night work calls, and the quiet dinners where words were few, we had begun to drift. Not in a way that was loud or obvious, but in the small silences that stretched longer than they should. I rolled up the yoga mat slowly, stealing a glance at him. He stood by the window, scrolling through his phone, but his eyes flicked toward me, just for a second, like he was caught between wanting to say something and holding it back. I remembered when his gaze used to linger without hesitation, when he would reach for me without needing a reason. The distance between us wasn't built overnight. It was made of missed touches, hurried mornings, and promises postponed. And yet, under that layer of dust, there was something else, something that refused to die. A desire, a spark, a need that neither of us had dared to fully confront. "Long day?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He looked at me, really looked this time, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Not as long as it feels when I'm not near you," he said, almost too casually, like he wanted to test if I was still listening the way I used to. That single sentence made my pulse skip. It wasn't a grand confession, but it was enough to remind me of the man who once whispered things in the dark that left my skin tingling for hours. I busied myself with pouring water into a glass, but his footsteps followed. I could sense him behind me again, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from his chest. He didn't touch me this time. He didn't have to. His silence was heavier than any embrace, his breath near my neck carrying questions neither of us were ready to answer. Hidden in that pause was everything we hadn't said, the longing to start over, the fear of being rejected, the ache of knowing time was slipping by and the intimacy we once shared was waiting, aching, to return. Some cracks in a relationship don't mean it's breaking. Sometimes, they're just places where the light wants to slip back in. And tonight, standing in that dim kitchen with him close enough to change the air I breathed, I wondered if this was the moment where the light would finally find its way. The evening deepened, wrapping the house in a dim hush, but inside me, the storm was only beginning to stir. His nearness lingered like an imprint, and yet, something in his eyes tonight felt different, hungrier, almost possessive. It wasn't just the casual touch on the yoga mat or the words he let slip in the kitchen. It was the way he kept watching me, as if measuring how far he could go before I would stop him, or give in. I leaned against the counter, sipping my water, trying to steady my breath, when he moved closer again, too close. His hand brushed past mine, reaching for nothing in particular, but his fingers lingered just a little too long, grazing my skin like a silent dare. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. "You've been distant lately," he said, voice low, his gaze locking onto mine. "Is someone else getting the attention I'm missing?" The words caught me off guard, sharp but laced with something raw. Jealousy. It wasn't an accusation exactly, but it made my heart race all the same. I turned to face him, startled by how much heat there was between us now. "You think I would?" I began, but the sentence hung unfinished, trapped in the space where his stare held me captive. He smirked, but it wasn't playful this time. It was deeper, like a man reclaiming something he feared was slipping away. "I see the way others look at you," he murmured, his hand now resting fully on the counter beside my hip, caging me in with that quiet dominance I hadn't felt in a long time. "Makes me wonder if I've been too easy on you." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. My pulse thudded against my throat as his thumb brushed the edge of my wrist, innocent to anyone watching, but laced with meaning only we understood. Was this the moment we would finally cross that thin line between longing and action? Or was this just the beginning of a storm neither of us could stop? The rain had started without warning, drumming softly against the windows, turning the house into a cocoon of muted echoes and shadows. He stood in the doorway of the living room, damp from the mist outside, his shirt clinging faintly to his shoulders. I was still on the mat, stretching absent-mindedly, when our eyes met, and everything else in the room seemed to blur. "Power's out in half the street," he said, voice steady, though his eyes betrayed something else, something restless. I didn't answer. I couldn't, not when every movement he made felt like it was pulling us closer to a moment we couldn't undo. He stepped forward slowly, the sound of his footsteps sinking into the soft carpet. There was no need for words now, the air spoke louder. My heartbeat raced as he moved behind me again, his hand brushing past my arm as he reached for the throw on the couch, too close to be an accident, too deliberate to call it chance. His breath was warm on my neck, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. "You're still tense," he murmured, almost like a challenge. "Want me to help with that?" The question lingered in the space between us, heavier than the silence. I swallowed hard, unsure whether to step away or lean in. My fingers curled into the edge of the mat as if anchoring myself to reason, but reason felt miles away now. He bent closer, his hand hovering just an inch above my waist, not touching, just waiting. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the same heat I had been trying to ignore for weeks. His voice, low and deliberate, wrapped around me like a secret, "Say yes, or stop me now." I didn't say either. And in that suspended heartbeat, the storm outside raged on, as if urging the moment to break. The storm outside had turned wild, rattling the windows as if echoing the chaos inside me. His hand finally closed around my waist, not hesitant this time, but certain, pulling me back just enough to feel the tremor in his breath against my neck. I froze, heart hammering, knowing this moment was no longer harmless. It was a line, and we were standing right on its edge. "I can't keep pretending I don't want this," he said, his voice rough, almost desperate. "Not anymore." My breath caught. The weight of those words pressed harder than his touch. "What are you saying?" I whispered, even though part of me already knew. He turned me slightly, just enough to see his face, tense, conflicted, hungry. "I know you've been meeting him," he said, eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that left no space for lies. My stomach dropped. "How did he?" "It's not what you think," I managed, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. His jaw tightened. "Then tell me what it is," he demanded. Because every time you look at your phone and your smile fades before you meet my eyes, I feel it. I see it. And I can't keep standing here like a stranger. The truth burned on my tongue, a mix of guilt and something darker, desire for the very man who now held me like I was his to lose. I looked away, but his hand caught my chin, guiding my gaze back to his. I don't want to lose you, he whispered, softer now, almost breaking. But if there's something you need, something you haven't told me, I'd rather hear it from your lips than in the silence you leave behind. The air between us throbbed with tension, jealousy, confession, and a pull that felt dangerous. My mind screamed to explain, to defend, but my body betrayed me, leaning closer to the man whose anger still somehow burned with want. I never wanted it to go this far, I said finally, my voice barely a breath. Too late, he murmured, his thumb brushing along my jaw, his other hand still gripping my waist as though daring me to break away. The storm cracked outside, a flash of lightning slicing through the dim room, illuminating everything we were, and everything we might destroy in the next breath. And just as his lips hovered an inch away from mine, the sound of a phone buzzing on the table shattered the moment. A name lit up the screen. Not his. The storm had slowed to a drizzle, but the air inside still felt heavy, thick with everything we had just unleashed. The phone lay between us on the table, its screen dark now, but the name that had flashed moments before lingered like a wound neither of us could look away from. His grip on my waist loosened, fingers slipping away as if the truth itself had burned him. Who is he? He asked, voice no longer sharp, but raw, quietly breaking. I swallowed, every excuse dissolving under the weight of his stare. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, I whispered, hating how weak it sounded. I didn't plan for any of this. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, pacing as though the walls were closing in. You let me touch you tonight knowing that? His voice rose, not in anger, but in anguish. All this time I thought I was the one losing you, and now I find out you were already gone. The words cut deep because they weren't entirely wrong. The messages, the late-night calls, they had started as distractions, moments of escape. But standing here, with his eyes wet and his jaw clenched, I realized what I truly stood to lose. I wanted you to fight for me, I said suddenly, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to feel like I still mattered. His laughter, short, bitter, filled the silence. And this was your way of asking? The storm outside had left the city glistening, and for a moment, so did his eyes, bright, furious, but still searching for something to hold on to. You should have told me, he said finally, voice low again. We could have fixed this before it broke us. I stepped forward, my own hands trembling now as I reached for him. Maybe it isn't too late, I whispered. Maybe this was the break we needed to see each other again. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then his hand rose, not to pull me close, but to wipe the tear that had slipped down my cheek. This isn't forgiveness, he said, almost cold. But it's a start. The storm had passed, but the air was still charged, less with fury now, more with something fragile, a choice. To rebuild, or to walk away. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the city glistening under the soft glow of streetlights. The air smelled fresh, renewed, like the pause after a long-held breath. We stood there in the quiet, the phone still on the table between us, its glow now long gone, but the weight of everything said and unsaid hung in the room like a fragile thread. He took a slow step toward me, the anger in his eyes replaced with something deeper, tiredness, yes, but also a longing that hadn't dimmed despite the storm we had just weathered. I don't want to lose you, he murmured, voice low, almost breaking. I met his gaze, heart aching with the truth I had carried too long. Then hold me like you mean it, I whispered. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek first, gentle, hesitant, before he pulled me against his chest. The warmth of him, the steadiness of his heartbeat, felt like coming home after being lost for too long. I wrapped my arms around him, closing my eyes as his breath tangled with my hair. "I should have fought for us sooner," he said against my temple. "And I should have never made you feel like you had to compete," I replied softly. There was no grand apology, no perfect words to erase the cracks we'd made, but in that quiet embrace, we both chose something far stronger, to begin again. Slowly. Honestly. He leaned back just enough to look into my eyes, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "No more secrets. No more silences," I said, and this time I meant it. The storm outside had cleared, but the storm within us had left something beautiful behind: clarity, warmth, and a chance to rebuild, not from the memory of what we were, but from the fire of what we still could be. He kissed me then, slow, certain, not to claim but to promise. And in that kiss, I felt the tension dissolve, replaced by a quiet, fierce love that felt brand new.